ChatGPT just put out a post on X, and that post was talking about how they are going to make it easier to shop in ChatGPT in order to generate results. And I think that there's a lot of very interesting things that are going to happen in 2025 and into 2026. The reality is the way that companies are going to market has to change. And I'm not sure that I've been hearing enough about that when we consider what folks are doing. I look in the market and I look at my peers of other agencies, and they're all talking about things like there's a war on organic search and you need to create more content, or you need to use these agents in order to create more content. And everything's focused on efficiency and playing the same old game. And I think it's going to become really obvious very quickly that the game is changing. And I think OpenAI's update today kind of reinforces that. Some of the numbers that they said that people already in the past week have used ChatGPT for 1 billion searches. Isn't there only like 7 billion people in the world? So I'm sure some of that is more of an agentic search. I don't know that a human is actually pressing search for every single one of those. I'm sure that there's some ways that ChatGPT is wanting those numbers to be higher, but it's still a profound number. And so it begs the question, what kind of updates are going to be happening to how consumers are buying? And I find it very easy to think about that type of thing when you start considering how buyer behavior is changing. So buyer behavior is a fascinating thing. And when we think about the contrast of how Google has dominated over the years and where all these incumbents start to come in, is it really comes down to confidence. The confidence for that consumer that the place they're going for the information is going to generate a reliable result for them. And I think we've got a very interesting thing happening right now, is with search, a Google search, Google has captured our customers' attention and ours by providing what we asked for and providing the right thing and measuring the effectiveness of the different types of information that are available. And it's tasked with presenting the best available information on in the World Wide Web. And when we consider what that means, when you get someone like ChatGPT coming in, the very nature of how the user experience is changing is something that is very compelling in regards to the difference. I think it's incredible when you start to consider the information and how we source information as consumers and how that fits into the buyer's journey. When we start considering the buyer's journey and how customers are going to be looking for information, it is starting to trend in a way, at least for early adopters right now, people are going to use large language models in order to make that a reality. But it's not a war on organic search, which is what a lot of people are grabbing in headlines and marketers are freaking out about. Gartner put out an update or a study that by the year 2026, 25% of organic search is going to decline. And I think that's an interesting generalization. And I'm calling it a generalization on purpose because when we start to look at some of the declines that we see, I don't see it as an attack on organic search. I think the very definition of organic search is probably going to change. But when we look at the overall organic traffic that's coming to a website, marketers have done a really great job of creating an environment where the top of the funnel is the largest distribution of content. Because we, as marketers and as businesses, have had to meet the buyer where they are in regards to information discovery, and then create a journey of additional content that nurtures them down the funnel. And if you think of a funnel, a lot of people have these like really wide funnels that taper down and are really narrow. The distribution of content is heavily skewed towards the top of the funnel. So if you bring in AI overviews as an example on Google, sure, that's going to feel like a war on organic search when really the war is on the top of the funnel, in my opinion. And it's a hypothesis we're still testing and looking at, but when we start to consider the type of information that is starting to trend down, we're seeing that top of the funnel, more informational based content is what is actually declining. So what does that mean? At its face value, Google has had a war on organic search for a really long time. They were doing rich snippets and the stuff that was showing up on position 0. All of that was actually when the war started, if you would. And they were providing the information to the buyer. The big difference now is generative AI and those AI overviews are now not just providing the details of the content, but they're actually reinforcing the next step. And so when we consider our top of the funnel content and the information that would usually be displayed there, rather than that information being presented with a link to go to our website so that we can start to build confidence early, it's being provided as a snippet in a Google search. And the next relevant step is being summarized based on what the LLM understands the intent to be. So it becomes really important for us to identify two things. We have to have and provide the confidence as an organization for the content that the large language models are going to need. And we have to make sure that we match our buyers where they are going to be. And that is changing. So when we start to think about the two things that are needed for the information discovery, we need to make sure that we capture the confidence and that there is clarity in what we're offering. And if you look at your buyer's journey and you look at the content in regards to why you're sharing some of that top of the funnel content and what the next relevant step is, are you providing enough clarity for a large language model to be able to know what the next step should be? Are you providing enough clarity for the human who's viewing that content to be able to see the next step? And when you start to consider what that looks like, when you think of that clarity and that confidence that's coming across, what signal are you sharing with that agent or that person on what the next step should be, and how are you presenting that information to either of those beings? It becomes a pretty significant problem statement when you start to consider that. And when we think of, that was just the talking about the Google side of things, when we start to consider Perplexity, and then you start thinking about OpenAI's ChatGPT, and now they're doing the ChatGPT search. Those are going to change the very nature of how you optimize for SEO. It doesn't make SEO less effective, but I think what it does do is it removes the emphasis on keyword capacities, because we're not going to be able to see how many times that keyword came up, because the reality of that keyword is it's really going to be focused around topic clusters. So the exciting thing to me is we get to be marketers again. And we need to get into the heads of the buyers and the original intents and what they're looking for. And we have to be hyper focused on the personalization, not just of Peggy Sue coming to your website, but also understanding what kind of content is Peggy Sue going to need, and where does this content fit in the buyer's journey, and also how would that articulate into information for an agent to be able to present that information to the human. How do we create confidence in the result and or the destination that someone has sent if they're using an agent to assist them with that entire buyer's journey? That's the question. And if we double down and we start thinking about how do we provide enough clarity for the humans to understand what the next step is, and how do we create enough confidence for the AI in general to recommend us, now we're starting to talk about optimization, but it's for that AI forward buyer. Now, I'm getting a little into the weeds on this confidence and this clarity side of things, but when you look at your website through that lens, think of the information that would be required if someone was 60% through the buyer's journey. They're about to raise their hand saying they're interested in a website project as an agency. right? What are the questions that they're going to have in the sales process? Today, a lot of companies gate and hide that information because they want the salesperson to be able to have that conversation. What happens in a world where that information is necessary in order to make sure that you stand out? What if that pitch deck, the information that's in that pitch deck is actually needed in order for you to secure the meeting in the first place? That's what you really have to start thinking about. So when we think of these updates that are happening, and they feel like they happen every single week, and we have agents for everything now, and we're doing deep research to try and understand something before we purchase, and we're looking for clarity of what the right solution is, the only way that you're going to be able to project that in the near term is to be doubling down on that user even more than you were based on the keyword. I have seen a lot of marketers in the past think of SEO, and they start SEO at the topic and the keyword level, and then they come back and they think about the personas and the information the personas would have around that particular area. I think we're going to witness something flip on its head where that keyword doesn't matter anymore. The thing that someone is looking for is going to be very valuable, but the reality is the persona and the information about the human is going to matter a lot to that large language model, which is going to give them a result with a completely different flavor in next step based on the context of the individual. And so if we zoom way out, we have to have our marketing hyper-personalized. We have to make sure that we are providing clarity and thinking about that experience one-off. And we have to make sure that we have an adequate representation and that adequate clarity across the entire buyer's journey from a content standpoint so that we can look into generating the right information at the right time and allow LLMs and these agents who are doing this research to go and look at our websites so that we can present it to the customer. So I challenge you, take a highlighter, and I want you to highlight all the promises that you make in your marketing. I want you to identify the content that might be missing in your pitch decks and in your sales conversations, and make sure that the questions themselves are happening so that you can be ready for this AI era of search, of the AI assisted buyer, and be ready for it as an organization, because it's going to happen very soon. In fact, it's happening already. And we've got to at least innovate fast enough for us to understand how your buyers are transitioning so that they can happen. And if you think, oh, I have an older generation, I don't have to worry about it. The crazy thing is the older generation is trusting these answers. And so depending on where your business fits in the customer journey in regards to how long those journeys are, you're not going to be able to ignore generative AI for very long. And when you hear generative AI, I want your first inkling to be not how can I use it or I don't need to use it, but think about how it changes your buyer's mindset and your buyer's expectations on what you do every day.